Professor Bissio, thank you very much for being with us. Um, thanks for the time your time, and I'm very happy to be able to discuss with you the situation in your continent, because it is really in the last weeks it is in the center of the upheaval in of a new upheaval with the continuous threats by President Trump and by the United States, which are escalating every day. We had 10% of the naval force of the United States is now in the Caribbean. Uh, there is there are open threats of regime change in Venezuela and indirect threats against Cuba, Nicaragua, Colombia, and Mexico. So, what is going on? Can you summarize the situation, please?
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here with you and with your audience. And yeah, you are right. We are facing in Latin America challenging moments. In my interpretation, it is a consequence of the shift in power, in geopolitical power, um, perceived by the Trump administration as a necessity for him to at least try to show to the world and to the domestic public and to Latin America in particular that the Monroe Doctrine that always has been shown by the Americans as the doctrine that would guide his security commitments, that Latin America still is and will be for a long time under its hegemony, not for allowed by the U.S. by the Uncle Sam, the big stick, to dream in being part of a multipolar world and to develop with sovereign rights other ways of promoting its development than depending on US support, etc., etc., etc. Well, one thing is what President Trump and his staff would like to be the reality. Another thing is what the reality shows. Yeah. Of course, Latin America is a fragile region in many aspects. Yeah. And particularly in this moment, we have the main initiatives of political integration in Latin America are not functioning or are not in its golden moment. Yeah, that means that we lack unity in Latin America, particularly in South America, and as the Roman Empire knew very well, yeah, where there is no unity, we are more fragile to face challenges. Yeah, so that's one point. But on the other side, even though in Latin America we are not facing our golden years, and we have many countries that in the last 2-3 years have been showing a growing political importance of the rightist movements and parties, and and not only rightists but extreme right parties winning elections or improving their presence at the parliaments, etc. And I can mention the case of Ecuador, yeah, of Paraguay, which has allowed, for instance, Paraguay recently in 3 days ago authorized American troops to enter its territory. That's the situation, of course, in El Salvador. We know how Bukele has been a trusty follower of Trump's ideas and implementing Trump's idea, in particular in relation to the immigrants. Yeah, that's the situation in Peru in some way. So,
What
on
is
the other hand,
the
mhm,
reason of this shift to the far right? Is it a simple reflection of Trump's rise in North America, or there are?
no,
Mm,
no, it's a movement that started not with Trump. It's it has been a long period of increasing the conservative rightist movements through different forms of acting. Yeah, the Pentecostal churches have been, for instance, one of the branches that have been improving this agenda very, very clearly in many countries, in particular in Brazil, for instance. Yeah, there has been for a long time the problem of the mass media, which are mainly under the control of the big monopoles of the media dominated by the American or Anglo-American interests. Yeah, so creating this atmosphere that always denouncing whatever could be understood as a real sovereign position and combating and struggling against, in particular, for instance, is very clear in relation to the Workers' Party's administrations. Lula's has been always under the fire, let's say, of the mainstream media, uh, with nuances, of course, but mainly, yeah, what the the possibility could mean of a way of facing the what means really a transformation, for instance, the land reform, let's say, or even a reform in the banks and the financial system, that are key uh, ways of possibilitating the maintenance or not of this way of uh, having the system in under control. There is no way the mass media will immediately be against denouncing and creating fake news, etc. And with the social media, of course, in the last years, as very important actors too. But it's not a problem that started with the social media. So we have the Pentecostal churches, we have the mass media, we have the direct or indirect intervention of the Americans through many ways of pressuring the different governments. The debt, for instance, is an issue. Yeah. Uh, and of course, we have to mention, because it's part of the problem too, that under those conditions, it's very difficult for any progressive or leftist government to show good results from his administrations. So
mhm.
there is also a disillusion in part of the, at least of the electorate of the voters, particularly the youngsters, in relation to the leftist and progressive forces.
Because
And
between 2000 and 2015, the left was uh, very powerful in Latin America. I think it was 20 of 22 countries, something like that. And one wonders, it was its mistake or objective conditions like the fall of the price of minerals, of first materials and things like that, which provoked this disappointment with the left. I mean, what is it? And there is, after all, one fundamental question. In present day conditions of financial capitalism, you need to have a kind of how to say, a kind of union between small or medium states, because otherwise you cannot resist the. And I think Hugo Chavez was it was only maybe the only one who understood that in that period. So is it possible for the left to create an alternative? What are the conditions for that?
the conditions are difficult. But for instance, one of the explanations of this, what I shouldn't use the word failure, but to not having the possibility of continuing uh, uh, in power, or in the government. Power is something different. Was what we have been analyzing, and many books have been launched in the last 2 years or even less than that. The lawfare instrument, that means the instrumentation of the justice to create the idea that these progressive governments were always corrupt. And that was, for instance, the case in Brazil when President Dilma Rousseff was impeached. The allegation was proved years later that it was false, yeah, that it was created with fake news, but with the complicity of the justice, or even the Supreme Court, and the media. And that is the situation in many other cases.
It seems
May
the establishment is using more and more, is instrumentalizing the justice mechanisms also in Europe and the United States.
Yeah, lawfare is what we have been calling this instrumentalization of the justice and using, of course, the media, the social media, those in parliament who repeat this way of presenting the facts. Yeah, that was the case very, very clearly in Brazil, not only with the impeached of President Dilma Rousseff, which was terrible because that was the first step to allowing a figure like Bolsonaro to become a president. Yeah, with also the complicity of the justice and the media. Why the justice? Because the justice intervened to put former President Lula, who was the natural candidate for the election after the impeachment of President Dilma Rousseff. The justice allowed, of course, through the implementation of this way of presenting the facts that was idealized by the US. It is a US strategy, absolutely, yeah, to put President Lula in prison, not allowing him to be the candidate, and so allowing finally Bolsonaro to win the election. And we have the disaster. We have been with more than 600,000 Brazilians dead through the coronavirus, and disasters atrás disasters. So, but what means also this lawfare way of presenting the facts, not only the defeat of the progressive forces presented as corrupt as the rightists always have been, but so everybody is corrupt, so politics is corrupt, nothing is being to change by any means, etc. But in the case of Brazil, and not only, through the lawfare was the big engineering industry and infrastructure industry in Brazil, which was very, very strong and was disputing in very latitudes in Africa, particularly with the American engineering infrastructure companies, was absolutely destroyed with the allegation of corruption. Yeah. So they destroyed the Brazilian engineering. That means employment and catastrophic consequences for the Brazilian economy, and politically we know what the price has been. So that means that the progressive government hasn't have any mistake. No, they have many mistakes, of course, but even with those mistakes, they could present results that no uh,
Right.
rightist government has ever presented. Yeah. So that's very sad, but that is reality.
Mm-hmm.
So, but what is the real change that, in my opinion, has to be taken into consideration? That in the very silently, very quietly, the Chinese infrastructure companies of infrastructure, the Chinese banks, the Chinese commerce enterprises have been working in Latin America in a very efficient way. So that means that today China is the most important partner in many fields, not only commerce, for most of the Latin American countries. Yeah. Some or mostly became part of this road and belt initiative, Chinese official belt and road initiative. Others, for instance, Brazil, decided that they didn't be part of this initiative to have very strong and very lucrative and interesting relations with China. Yeah, and also very silently, Russia has been working with some of the governments, particularly in analyzing the case of Venezuela, uh, providing some new armament, training forces, creating new ways of understanding the laws of the war and confrontation in present moment. So that is what we have to understand. That is the background of this present situation, trying to understand the aggressivity of the Trump administration in relation to Latin America. Uh, with this scenario, you can see that Trump faces the challenge of first being not anymore relevant for the Eurasian continent, which has its own dynamic, its own, let's say, agreements with China, of course, as its first reference. Not only there is India also, there is Indonesia, coming rapidly to
You are
become
right,
an
but
important actor. Mm.
the United States have still absolute domination over Europe, and they have quite a domination over Middle East or Israel through the United States. I don't know who is superior from
Yeah,
the powers.
yeah.
So I
No,
suppose
of course, of course.
they are not exactly at the moment they are leaving all the planet and they concentrate only Latin America.
No, 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 no. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. But it is evident for them and for all the rest of the world that even though it is, of course, also important to recognize that they still are very relevant actors in many parts of the world, not only in Latin America, but they are forced to divide this hegemony with other actors that very rapidly have developed their own agenda, their own way of understanding the world and its role in the world. Yeah, and that have been acting very cleverly, not with propaganda and words and being on the media, but acting effectively on the ground in a very positive way, offering what? Offering alternatives to the rules imposed by the Western hegemony in through the World Bank, through the FMI, through the all the agenda that always imposed without really giving something very substantial in exchange. That was the way China, in particular, has been growing and growing and growing. It has been seen in growing importance. Particularly, I can speak on the case of Latin America, but I think in Africa it's not very different. So that's the whole scenario. So the question that you put for me: are we going to expect an aggression of the Trump's administration, the direct aggression, an occupation of Venezuela or Cuba or Colombia, etc.? It is a possibility. Yeah, that's what could appear as the more probably scenario in the next weeks. But it is not easy for the American administration to act like that. The internal, the domestic scenario for Trump is not very easy. The support for this kind
To
of
sell a new
initiative
war,
is hmm?
to sell a new war in Latin America. It is not easy for Trump to
No.
sell to
I
his
think it is
market a new war.
no. It is not easy.
As he can
Not
do,
only
for instance,
because
a bombing campaign, not a ground land invasion.
yeah, that's what could be the result of these adversities that he is facing in relation of any other kind of operation, to have to use drones or bombing directly or etc. They have improved the what they call the impossibility of any vessel with petrol to go out Venezuela. No?
Which is
That's
also
severe.
an indirect war against Cuba, because Cuba is using
Yeah,
Venezuelan oil for its energy supply. So it is
yeah,
indirectly a war against Cuba. And according to what you have said, it's also a war against Russia and China, an indirect war against Russia and China.
yeah,
And I'm
yeah.
wondering what Russia and China will do anyway. I don't know, but
Yeah, it's not easy for them to take any direct measure. I can imagine, yeah, because they also are facing their own problems in their own space of influence. Yeah. So From the Brazilian perspective, the possibility of having a direct aggression against Venezuela is a huge, huge challenge for Brazil. Brazil has not recognized formally the Maduro administration, but has had a very open, direct position, clear position, condemning any possibility of aggression against Venezuela. On the other hand, they have been in the news in Brazil has been clearly announced that there are hundreds, perhaps thousands of volunteers that are willing to enter Venezuela to fight with the Venezuelans against any kind of aggression. So I think that was Jeffrey Sachs that denounced the possibility of an aggression to Venezuela as a new Vietnam. And I think that the example of Vietnam is very, very present in most of the Americans, at least those who have lived the terrible consequence of the defeat and the price of the Vietnam War, to at least pay attention to what the real scenario is and what the consequences could be for the in first hand for the Trump administration, but indirectly for the US as a whole. Yeah, and they are not in the best moment to pay that price. Yeah, and to have such a mess, let's say. Yeah,
Yeah.
again.
You know, Mrs. Bissio, we have the following problem. There is an extremist nucleus in the United States administration which is connected with the extremist nucleus which is governing Israel. And their ideas are to dominate the world by force. They say globalization has failed to assure Western domination, so we can dominate by force. We must dominate by force. And I'm afraid that they may push the Trump administration into a war because I don't understand if they have got 10% of their fleet in the Caribbean, what they will do? They will just get out without getting anything. It will seem as a ridiculous thing. I think there is a chance that they will. I'm afraid there is a chance that they will try something. I don't know what. Uh, but by the way, there is another interesting option to that. You know, since the 60s, the preservation of the Cuban regime and the non-nuclear character of this regime was a part of the understanding between Russians and Americans. And we see again in this field that this equilibrium, which was established even during the Cold War and during Perestroika time between Soviet Union and then Russia and America, is again to be destroyed if the Americans try to make a military attack on Cuba, which have promised not to do long ago.
Yeah, they have been voices denouncing that we are experiencing the most dangerous moment in relation to this particular aspect, nuclear war. Then, as a reference, it can be quoted the moment in which this missile crisis in 1962 appeared to be the preamble of the Third World War, nuclear war. But of course, there were two great studies, yeah, Khrushchev and Kennedy, who understood perfectly what was at stake and decided that they would prefer to open a dialogue and to understand each other's ways of seeing the situation, analyzing the situation, what interests were at stake in each side, and decide that that could be a diplomatic solution. And it was like that the solution was really approved, and the missiles in Cuba were retired, and also in Poland by the US. So
And of
as
Turkey also.
yeah, as in any negotiation, both sides have to see to decide, well, that's is worthwhile to give up, etc. Yeah. So we don't have in this part of the world something a figure, yeah, with the statue of Kennedy, yeah. So unfortunately, and those who know better than I myself, those who surround Trump also do not trust any of them, yeah. So that is a worse
It seems that very strange
news,
Zionist,
not a good news, yeah, a bad
it's
news, but the
but
worst of all
very,
the
very,
possibilities, because
very,
if
very,
we
very
don't have
strange.
a staff which can show to Trump, yeah, what the real risk are, well, yeah, anything could happen. But also we can think that at least some way of understanding the cost can be proved, shown. I don't know. Those who knows Trump say that he does not read anything. He does not want to be presented to much complexity, but he is intuitive.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Anyway, so to return to the Venezuelan question, how the peoples of
I,
Latin
I'm not
America.
I'm not hearing you well now.
Yes, I say to return a little bit to the question of Venezuela, how the Latin American public is, the public opinion is understanding those threats, how they feel this situation, how they.
Well, there is not an uniform way of reacting to this scenario. Yeah, they were, and there are those who understand, for instance, that the Nobel Prize to Koreana, no, it was a very important, no, decision, just decision, and that was the way to show that the Maduro should leave, etc. There are some supporters of this way of understanding the situation in the media and in some of the talk shows, etc. But there are others, and I may say that the majority, that even though perhaps not willing to support Maduro directly, are absolutely against any possibility of an American aggression, because that is the red limit, the red line, yeah, that is to disrespect all the rules, even though we know that for a long time the Americans have been not respecting any rules anymore. Yeah, but we have to think that the rules exist, even though the Americans are not willing to follow them. Yeah. And so there are many voices that are denouncing this American interfering, this American potential aggression, the American presence ostensibly of these forces on the Caribbean area. And more than that, the willingness of some of the countries like Paraguay, I mentioned, and Trinidad and Tobago or República Dominicana, who were willing to open their airspace and land airports, etc., for American troops. Yeah. So once again, we Latin Americans are not enough united in face of the challenge we are seeing. Yeah.
Already we have seen, this blockade, this naval blockade of the country is already an act of war. Uh,
Mm.
I think that presidents of Brazil, of Mexico, etc., did not react to this um, in a very strong way. What do you think?
The president of Mexico has reacted. President Lula has been reacting at the moment only by words, of course. Yeah, denouncing and vindicating the international law, etc. Of course, that is not enough. Yeah, that's not enough. But what can they do before anything happens? Yeah, the real red line will be the moment that, for instance, something concrete more than the blockade, which is of course an act of war, absolutely, but okay, it's an intimidation way, etc. So the blockade of Cuba has been for more than since the very initial moments of the revolution, and still is there. So the blockade itself is, let's say, something familiar for Latin
But
Americans. Yeah.
in Cuba, there is no a blockade of this kind. I mean, they did not forbid the transportation to and from the country.
Well, it depends on what you understand, because they have been by many different means a blockade effectively, for instance, not allowing air companies to fly to Cuba, tourism not allowed to Cuba, the banks not allowed to have exchanges, etc. So of course, it's not the blockade that we are facing in Venezuela, but it has been, even though perhaps not in such a visual way, yeah, but terrible consequences, yeah, terrible consequences for Cuba, yeah. The blockade is has been, it is proved that has cost lives in many ways for Cuba. Yeah.
And not only for many countries. But
Yeah.
another question is, the Western media are portraying, like they have done every time the West is going to launch an attack against the country, they have portrayed Venezuela as an absolutely corrupt dictatorship and things like that, you know it. Uh,
Mm.
how is the real situation in Venezuela? What
Well,
is the
I,
level
I
of support of the regime by the population?
I can't speak by myself directly because I have not been in Venezuela for a long time. I can rely on opinions that I trust. Yeah. There have been 2 or 3 colleagues, very, very ethic and important, solid that have been visiting Venezuela the last weeks and have been reporting the high support to President Maduro, even though some of the supporters say that after this hard period, a discussion should come among the Venezuelans for to discuss the future. But it is not the case in what I understand is the vast majority of those who are there in Venezuela supporting this pressure. There is no moment now to put uh, to put in front the differences. On the contrary, it is the moment to unite in face of the aggression. Yeah,
So you
and I
mean it is,
understand quite well that situation because it is vivid this way of understanding the necessity of the moment also for instance here in Brazil, yeah, where there are many doubts about Maduro, etc., but no doubt that the aggression has to be condemned in all terms. Yeah. Mm.
I have seen also that the Brazilian movement of land workers, which is a great trade union, if I understand well, a very great trade union, one of the greatest in the world, has decided to organize international brigades in
Brigades.
like in Spain, in case of a United States aggression against Venezuela. But I read also in the Western press about the economic catastrophe of Venezuela, etc. But I think all this is not true because the real data is saying that in the last 4 or 5 years, Venezuela's economic situation was quite good, and
Mm.
Maduro government has some good results in the economic field. What do you think?
Yeah, I also agree. That's the information I have also. And well, I don't I don't read anymore the mass media, and because they have no more credibility. Yeah,
You mean the
after
Western
what
mass media?
the Western mass media, yeah, after what we have seen in relation to Gaza, I think we can't. Even those who were in the past the most credible, like BBC, you may know the crisis, yeah, that
Yes.
BBC is facing, yeah. So
In all,
it doesn't matter what they say because we
in,
know that they are aligned with the Western interests, etc., and so they create their own reality.
that is true, and we see a rise of, I would say, totalitarian tendencies in all the West, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
by the way, I would like to ask you something else. You were the founder and director of different magazines in the past. You have covered the third world struggles, even the Carnation Revolution in Portugal. You are familiar with African and Asian movements of national liberation and post-colonial, the first post-colonial independence governments. So, from all this experience, uh, uh, what can you, what is what has remained mostly the impression that you keep mostly in your mind from all these upheavals, changes in the situation, and so on in this tricontinental struggle, so to say? Because you are in this way you are a lucky person. You have debated with, you have discussed with all the leaders of the third world somehow. So
Yeah, most of them, or some of them, assassinated. Yeah, like Zamora Machel, for instance. I consider Zamora Machel one of the most important leaders I have interviewed. Or Arafat, also murdered, poisoned, yeah, and Zamora Machel murdered through very sophisticated means in an air crash. Uh, well, yeah, that's the price for many of those who have been coherent till the last moment, the very last moment. Yeah, I haven't interviewed Amilcar Cabral, but I admire very, very much his way of thinking, his legacy. Yeah, also murdered. Yeah. In Latin America, we have many cases. We have Omar Torrijos, the general who fight very strongly and for decades to recover the Canal de Panama for Panama people. Yeah. And it was a success for him, but he was killed in also through aircraft coalition. Yeah. But an assassination, really. And Salvador Allende. And so we have the, not to mention Che Guevara because he was in a direct armed struggle. But in a moment like the one we are facing, we are living in which I think the historians of the future, next future centuries, the 24th, 25th century, if the humanity survives till that, the planet managed to survive, then the humanity also. The planet will survive. The planet is another thing, but we in the planet is different. Yeah. So I imagine that the historians of the future will analyze this moment we are facing, we are living in, as a very fundamental moment of a change in the course of the humanity to organize itself as a society. I don't think that the capitalist system can survive because if he survives, is the system, if the way the capitalist is nowadays exploiting humanity managed to survive, humanity will not afford this future. So I
Humanity will not
necessary.
survive.
Huh?
Humanity will not survive.
Humanity will not survive. Yeah, humans will not survive. Yeah, not even those who think that they have all in their hands, because they are crazy if they understand that they are capable of surviving alone as a minority in a planet who is being destroyed. So I think that if we are going to survive as humans, as humanity, and I strongly believe that we are, I can't only understand that we finally understood that we are living in a planet, we are only one humanity, and we have to work together for our common future. And that's the way I think the many Asians are seeing the present and building the future. I have been recently to China and to Indonesia, and I returned convinced that there is the seed for another way of organizing the human society.
Ex-Oriente lux.
So, yeah, some values that are very important for the future. Not individualism, but the way of understanding our common necessities. Yeah. Shall we call this socialism, communism? What is this? I don't know. The name is not important. Important is the content of what we are meaning. And we are meaning as a way of organizing society in which we understand that we have a planet with limits, physical limits of exploitation, and those limits imposed for the human beings a different way of organizing themselves and their needs. So in this sense, it's a moment in which a declining system is trying to survive at any cost. An emerging system is not strong enough at the moment, but not strong enough to destroy it or to supervise the other, but strong enough to show the way we have to see the future. Yeah, and this is the moment in which this very definitive struggle is being online, is being uh, we are experiencing this very definitive struggle about models of organizing the human society, and therefore it's so dangerous. But also we have to look at the future with the confidence that the humanity will again see the common future as the only value that is really worthwhile to struggle for. It's an utopian way of understanding the future. I don't think it is utopian. I think it is an imposition of the reality we are facing.
Anyway,
But
it seems more utopian that the present system will be able to safeguard the survival of humanity and of its civilization.
no, the present system, capitalist system, is not the one who is going to guide the survival. Absolutely. I'm not saying that. I think the capitalist system is being questioned very, very rapidly. That's my interpretation of this moment. Yeah, but okay. So, are we facing at this time in Latin America a possibility of a direct aggression? Let's see the next weeks. Maybe the cost will be very high for us, of course. Firstly, for the Americans, too. Are we prepared? I think that, well, who is prepared to face the most important army in the world? Difficult, but we have to if there is going to be a new Vietnam, as many have created this comparison. Well, Vietnam was a defeat for the Americans. We are not the Vietnamese. The weapons the Americans have now, what is the difference? Nuclear weapons?
I don't think they are going to use them.
So
Politically, it's
I don't know. You
difficult.
are putting some questions that there are no way to answer. Yeah,
What
without
is
the
disappointing is the fact that we don't see any large movement of or mobilization worldwide to stop this aggression before it is becoming more important. Unfortunately, we see that especially Western societies are very passive, and the world public opinion, of course, it has demonstrated its force in relation to Palestine, but uh, most governments and avoid to take positions and to take a clear position, and mass media worldwide do not want to criticize the United States. The United States seem to be in decline, but nobody wants to defy their power. So I don't know what will happen finally.
I
Anyway,
think that we are in the Western Hemisphere, in Europe, in Latin America, we are in a bubble, yeah, created by the mass media, the social media, uh, those who repeat and repeat and repeat their own words and the world way of understanding in the present, etc. And we are unable to see that out of the bubble there is another world emerging, and there is emerging another world, very, very creative, very strong, very commitment with a new future.
You mean Global
And
South and the BRICS?
yeah, Asia with BRICS, and also many or others who are not directly in the BRICS, but are very willing to look and to contribute to what they are proposing. Yeah.
So,
And of course, BRICS, just to finish, BRICS is one of the issues that also is behind the Trump's aggression against Venezuela, because indirectly it is an aggression to Brazil too. And Brazil means BRICS. BRICS in Latin America. Yeah.
so it seems you have to construct before it is too late a union of the forces and the countries which want to resist United States imperialism and colonialism, because otherwise, I'm afraid that if, for example, they win over Venezuela, which I don't believe it will be so easy, then the next target, one of the next targets, will be Cuba and Brazil. Brazil will be how
There,
a government,
yeah,
a Lula government can survive after a defeat of Maduro. I mean, I don't think that will be possible.
yeah. Therefore, I I don't think, Dimitris, that we have to rely on what it is the visible reaction to this aggression or potential aggression or concrete aggression, because the blockade is an aggression. We have to see what is under the surface, but it is there. Yeah. And by this metaphor, I think that we have to think on a Venezuelan reality that involves China and Russia, and also a reaction, potential and concrete, of people from all over Latin America to be willing not to allow any aggression to succeed. So this is what does not appear on the surface, but it is there. It is there. And if Trump hasn't decided yet to take any further step, I think that he intuitively understands that under the surface may be this scenario, this reaction that I mentioned.
Let us hope you are right, both on the question
Okay.
of top understanding and on the question of the underground. But I believe also that an imperial force which is going too far, usually in history, we know that there is a counter reaction. And we have, for example, the recent example of Israel, which 2 years ago nobody could criticize Israel. He would be ostracized as an anti Semite, as I don't know what. Now, Israel has become a pariah state because it did not understand, did not want to understand the importance that politics still have an importance, that human beings still count, not only force. But of course, we will see, because this is this is a struggle between the good and the evil, which is continuing, and we cannot be certain for
Yeah.
the outcome. Thank you very much for
Yeah.
our discussion. Thank you very much for your time. I was glad to be here, me from Athens and you from Rio, and having this discussion about Latin American and global